Welcome back to my channel as I do another triple upload for UCL Fantasy heading into Matchday 14, the second leg of the quarterfinals. This will be my team selection, so unlike the best wildcard and limitless squads, I'll be talking about a different approach for this stage of the competition because with only 3 transfers, I need to optimize my team and have it in a good position, not just for the matchday in front of me, but also for the semi-finals and beyond. Join my UCL Fantasy Mini League. The code is SEINOF. There is an auto-join link in the description, and you can also copy and paste that code and go into the UEFA Gaming Hub app or on the browser. So be sure to check that out, and I'd highly encourage you to try UCL Fantasy if you haven't played it before. But ultimately, with 3 transfers, I have to think about the week right in front of me, but also the long term and having that right balance for the semi-finals and beyond. So it's a combination of getting fantasy points immediately, but also having enough players for future rounds. Matchday 17 will not be much of a concern because we only need a starting 11 for the Champions League final. But for matchdays 14, 15 and 16, I want to have that right balance. Goalkeepers playing on different days, starting the Tuesday players as usual, and then having good Wednesday options on the bench if needed, of course. And that's all covered in my How to Play UCL Fantasy Guide, the chip strategy video, and every single podcast I've made for the Champions League this season. Be sure to drop a like on this one, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date on my content for both the Champions League and FPL. There'll be double Game Week 33 content over the next couple of days too, and keep your eyes peeled for more deadline streams like the one tomorrow for the Champions League, and the same goes for FPL on Saturday as well. Also leave a 5-star review on Spotify, follow me on that platform, join my Discord server, there's my Twitter, Instagram and Blue Sky, and if you want early access to my videos amongst many other perks, then check out my Patreon, which is patreon.com/FPLDylan, and click the join button on YouTube. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Matchday 13 was only a week ago, and it was another very solid performance from my UCL Fantasy squad, and I'm very happy with the outcome. Starting with the goalkeeper in David Raya, he was the highest scoring player in this position with 10 points, and whilst Manuel Neuer also produced a magnificent display on the night, he only got 7 points compared to Raya's 10 because he was booked and he wasn't able to keep a clean sheet against Real Madrid, whilst Raya was one of the main reasons why Arsenal were able to keep one against Sporting, making 5 saves, and at least 2 of them were absolutely spectacular. Now, Arsenal were very shaky against Bournemouth a couple of days later. They lost 2-1 in the Premier League, and Raya had a good first half with his distribution, and it just kind of reinforced this whole why Kepa start the Carabao Cup final and also against Southampton. But then we saw him take too long on the ball. Arsenal had no ideas on how to play out, and they had no control of that game against Bournemouth, and ultimately they deserved to lose that match. But there's a lot of pressure on this week for Arsenal against Sporting and Man City, because if they win these 2 games or at least get a positive result at the Etihad, then I think Arsenal are in a good position actually on both fronts. But after being eliminated from the other 2 cup competitions and that loss against Bournemouth, which opens the title race open, it just invites more unnecessary pressure, and that sums up Arsenal to a T. Thankfully though, that triple up in the Arsenal defence definitely worked wonders in Matchday 13, with Saliba and Gabriel both producing 7-pointers, just like the 2 PSG fullbacks in Nuno Mendes and Hakimi. So all of them kept clean sheets and got a ball recovery point, and that's pretty much all that needs to be said about each particular pick. But who should we have for Matchday 14 and beyond? Well, honestly, I think all 4 of them could make it into your limitless, wildcard squad, or even with normal transfers. But Liverpool away from home is still not going to be easy for a team as good as Paris Saint-Germain. So in terms of the clean sheet odds, PSG aren't that favoured actually, and I covered that in the best limitless team video, but Arsenal are top with a 48% probability against Sporting at home. So having Raya, Saliba and Gabriel looks very promising on paper, but I think the recent form and some shaky defensive performances as well definitely leave a lot of doubts in our minds when it comes to Arsenal assets across the board. Now in the midfield, I only had 3 players, but Kvaratskhelia was my captain, and he got 11 points as his baseline score. I almost went for Yamal on the Wednesday. I did a substitution deadline stream, and by the way, if you want to see that moving forwards for matchday 14, 15 and 16, then let me know down the comment section below. But I went for Kvaratskhelia in the end, and thankfully it paid off big time. Yamal got 4 points, and that's not too shabby considering that he didn't score or assist, but ultimately that's a massive swing there between him and Kvaratskhelia. And a lot of people would have captained Mbappé or Kane on the Tuesday to produce 6 or 7 points. And just to have those players in your team as well as Kvaratskhelia, you do gain quite a few points in the process by making that sort of switch, but there's always that risk versus reward element, and usually I will just hold the captaincy like I did a few weeks ago with Gabriel, who produced 8 points, but then Rafinha gets 23 on the following day. But there are examples where it goes horribly wrong and you sort of wish you kept your Tuesday captain. So that adds another dimension to UCL Fantasy. But Kvaratskhelia is in incredible form right now. He was the highest scoring player in Matchday 13 with 11 points, and in the round of 16 across both matches, he was also the highest scoring player. And the same goes for the entire season now with 93 points overall. Dominik Szoboszlai isn't too far behind though, but he blanked against PSG away with 3 points there, and that was his third blank of the season in the Champions League, whilst Yamal is still a brilliant option for the captaincy on the Tuesday. I think it's between him, Kvaratskhelia and Alvarez. Let me know your thoughts as well down in the comment section there, but I do have a preference at this moment in time, but there's no guarantee I bring this player in for the Tuesday set of matches, so that could be a bit of a very weird situation, to put it very bluntly. Now, Luis Diaz is a player that I've been very impressed by recently across all competitions, and in the Champions League, he hasn't gotten anything crazy in terms of double-digit hauls, but he got that 9-pointer, of course, against Atalanta a couple of weeks ago, and he followed that up with a goal against Real Madrid, the opener, and Harry Kane obviously put the nail in that result, of course. Mbappé scored a consolation goal, but that could prove very useful if Real Madrid were to score an early goal at the Allianz and put some pressure on Bayern Munich, who are currently the best team in world football, unbeaten in 15 matches, 9 wins out of the last 10, so they are looking really impressive at the moment, and Kane wasn't even needed in a 5-0 win over St. Pauli, but I am lacking Alvarez up front and also another Bayern Munich midfielder. Now, that could be compensated for because I've got Diaz and Harry Kane, and ultimately Elise had the same score as Diaz last time out, who was booked, of course, but this front three looks very encouraging, and I don't think there's a real need to change things, but if I was to make a tweak, it would be Diaz to Alvarez. I would need money in the bank, though, to make that possible, and that requires downgrades in the other positions. That could include some of my bench players like Joan Garcia, who has been absolutely horrific, but ultimately there's nothing I can really do in this position to help me in my quest to gain more funds, because Seinof also costs 4.4 million, but he is the better option, that's for sure. You could argue that against Atletico Madrid away, Joan Garcia looks more appealing on paper compared to Seinof facing Liverpool away, and I've already got 2 PSG defenders in my setup, but I've got Joao Cancelo, and a double up in the Barca defence just isn't worth it at the moment. Cancelo with 0 points there, he was booked. He is now 1 yellow card away from suspension, and he's got 3 fantasy points in 3 matches, whilst Trincao is a brilliant option in general, but he blanked against Arsenal. He got 3 points there in general, and with a late clean sheet wipeout, of course, he was on for 4 points before that happened, but I think Trincao is one of those difference makers with 6% ownership, so he's a hidden gem there, and he's definitely the best sporting asset in general. And the other player is Vinicius Jr., who is yet another player who is walking that suspension tightrope alongside Mbappé. I break all of this down in my best wildcard squad. The same goes for injury updates and doubtful players, and also suspensions. There's one to look out for in Real Madrid with Tchouaméni, who will miss that Bayern Munich clash, but ultimately I captain the best player in Matchday 13, and that's always going to help me. And 2 Player of the Match awards is always very encouraging, especially because there were only 4 matches, so that's a decent success rate. I'm hoping for more of the same next time round. I got 85 points, so it was a small green arrow to 9.3 thousand. It's very competitive this season, and to be fair, every single campaign is always going to be difficult in the Champions League, but it seems like this season there are so many high scores flying around. For example, I've scored over 100 points, I think, on 4 occasions, and I still had a few bad weeks, which have really cost me in the grand scheme of things, but it's still a good position to be in, and if I can have more weeks like Matchday 13 and also in previous ones like Matchday 12, then I'm definitely going to be in a very good position to wrap up this season in the strongest way possible. But it's all about the transfer plans now to optimize my setup for the next Matchday and beyond, and that's where Joao Cancelo to Ruggeri could be a factor. This was something I talked about a few weeks ago, or possibly even over a month ago, and that was the other way around, selling Ruggeri to Cancelo, but ultimately Ruggeri has been a far better fantasy pick since then, and he got 10 points, of course, whilst Cancelo got 0 in their head-to-head clash last time out. But they're both suspension risks either way, and I'm not really going to help myself from that perspective, but Atletico Madrid have put themselves in a commanding position in the tie. They're 2-0 up, and ultimately at home, I'm not saying you expect them to see it out, but they have a very decent position to be in, whilst Barcelona have to open up a little bit more. and I don't see them keeping a clean sheet. Now, in the odds I talked about in the best wildcard team video, Barcelona are right up there in the top 3, whilst Atletico are second bottom. I'm not sure if I agree with those odds, to be honest with you, but I think Ruggeri offers great value, and that's the reason why I'm considering this switch in the first place, because it opens up the doors for other transfers in the midfield and forward line. That includes Trincao to Vitinha, which I also talked about in my Matchday 13 team selection video, but with Trincao, I was happy to keep him in the end because he was at home, and Vitinha ultimately blanked. They both got 3 points in the end, and I definitely bought the right PSG midfielder, if you will, in Kvaratskhelia. I finally bought him in, but the other one I'm looking at is Desiree Doué. In order to get him, I would have to probably make some bigger downgrades elsewhere or sell one of my premium options, and that would be in the midfield more than anything else. Vinicius Jr. to one of Doué or Michael Elise is definitely on the cards, and the only reason I'd really do this is to make a big move up front in Diaz to Alvarez. I would not be making all 4 transfers at the same time because that would be for a -4 hit. I would only stick with the free transfers at my disposal, and Alvarez is one of my top priorities. But I still like Luis Diaz. He's in my top 5 best forwards in the game, but I think there's a big gap between him and Alvarez, who is closer to Mbappé and Kane compared to the rest of the pack, and technically Alvarez is ahead of Kane when it comes to UCL fantasy points this season. So I'm very intrigued by this prospect, and I also think Barcelona are very shaky defensively. I've got Joan Garcia in goal already and Joao Cancelo, but I could make a few tweaks here and there and get another Atleti player or 2 in Alvarez and Ruggeri to complete my Matchday 14 squad. So as things stand, these are the plans for the upcoming deadline, and this can definitely change in tomorrow's deadline stream. Joan Garcia would be my starting goalkeeper against Atletico Madrid away, whilst David Raya plays on the Wednesday, so naturally he would drop to the bench. And then going to the defensive line, I would have Joao Cancelo, potentially Hakimi and Nuno Mendes, but there is a possibility I make that switch and go from Joao Cancelo to Ruggeri, and I'm even open to other defenders like Gonzalo Inacio from Sporting, especially if Arsenal continue to struggle to create chances, control games, and actually look like a threat in most matches, because I think they've been quite poor in this calendar year. But Hakimi and Nuno Mendes are still viable options despite facing Liverpool away from home, and last season they got a 1-0 win against the Premier League champions, and PSG went on to win the Champions League themselves. So I definitely like that duo of Hakimi and Nuno Mendes, and with the midfield, Kvaratskhelia would be the standout PSG option, and I wouldn't mind having a secondary choice here like Desiree Doué or Vitinha, but the Doué pick would only be feasible if I sell Vinicius Jr. really, and I'm happy to keep the Brazilian for 1 more week at least. Lamine Yamal is still an excellent choice, but Barcelona have it all to do really, and a triple up in the Barca team definitely looks a bit risky considering their position in this tie at the moment, and that's why selling Cancelo would be the most plausible and realistic option that I have on offer. The Dominic Szoboszlai could be worth keeping, even if Liverpool will likely be eliminated at the hands of PSG for the 2nd season running, because he's the type of player who can produce a return even if his team ends up losing. With 8 returns in 11 matches, we have seen real consistency from him and multiple double-digit hauls, player of the match awards, goals, assists, ball recoveries. He ticks all the boxes, and he's by far the best Liverpool asset this season. Van Dijk would be second, but I think those 2 are the only ones you'd really consider, and because I think PSG will score, Szoboszlai would be the clear standout for Matchday 13 or 14 as well, in my opinion. So yeah, Szoboszlai for me is definitely going to be in my team for the next deadline. The same goes for Mbappé and Kane, but Diaz could become Alvarez. I'll show you what my team would look like with those transfers being made towards the end of this video, and Alvarez coming in for Diaz is definitely a possibility. It's one of the key transfer targets I'm looking at for the second leg, but it's also not really like a pressing issue to sell Diaz. It's a bit like Szoboszlai and a few of the other midfielders and players I've talked about throughout this video, like Vinicius Jr. They could all be held on to for at least 1 more week, but ultimately I don't want to have too many fires to put out or transfers waiting to happen, because if you book in too many, that's where even 5 transfers will not be enough for you in Matchday 15. So be very careful about that balance, but this front 3 did the job in the first leg. They all scored in the same game, and we could see something similar next time, but I don't think that'll be the case. I think 1 or 2 of them will score, and most likely will be Mbappé and Harry Kane, but I'm more open to selling Diaz from this front 3 and keeping the other 2, but it requires downgrades elsewhere. Now, on my bench, I've got Raya, Gabriel, Saliba, and Francisco Trincao, so all of them featuring in the same game, a triple up in the Arsenal defence, and then one Sporting attacker. I'm still quite happy to keep Trincao, even though there is a direct clash there between him and the triple up in the Arsenal defence. But if you are backing the Gunners to get the job done, or at least keep a clean sheet on the night, then I think it's probably worth offloading Trincao and going in a different direction. But Tchouaméni is suspended. You could consider Gravenberch and McAllister, but it's a similar story to Szoboszlai, and they're infinitely worse options in my opinion when it comes to fantasy. With PSG, Vitinha would be a nice option to replace Trincao, but it also requires a downgrade because I've got 0.2 million in the bank, and as good as my squad value is, it requires restructuring my squad, and that's why Vinicius being downgraded to Elise is becoming more appealing at this moment in time, because it also allows me to get Alvarez for Diaz and then possibly Vitinha in for Francisco Trincao. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. The same goes for the captaincy too. I think Kvaratskhelia would be my Tuesday captain unless I bought in Alvarez. If that was the case, I would go to the Argentine, and I talked about this in my best limitless team video with a full top 10 list and talking about the Tuesday and Wednesday options for that limitless squad. But on the Wednesday, I think Harry Kane is the standout player. I know Mbappé is still a viable option, and if you are backing Real Madrid to win that game or score plenty of goals, then Mbappé is always going to be a safe bet. But I think Harry Kane being at home, playing in the better team, and showing considerably better form, he is the best option overall for me when it comes to Matchday 14 and the captaincy. So I think Kvaratskhelia and Kane with my current setup, and if I buy in Alvarez as planned, then I think the Argentine will be my first captain for the Tuesday set of matches. And I'd be very interested to see if you have any other ideas when it comes to the armband, maybe some defenders like Gabriel, who worked fairly well last time out with 7 points, and he's been very consistent over the course of the season. I don't recommend captaining goalkeepers, but we saw David Raya produce 10 points. He was the joint second highest scoring player match day 13. So sometimes going for something crazy can pay off, but I went for something a bit more template and safe in Kvaratskhelia, and it definitely ended up being the correct choice. But there are multiple ways of playing UCL Fantasy with differentials, hidden gems, budget picks, you name it, and they've all been covered throughout my videos. It's definitely worth comparing this setup to what I talked about throughout this video, which is basically my team without making any transfer whatsoever. So instead of having a triple up in the Barcelona team, I would have two options in Joan Garcia and Yamal, and I'd have two Atletico Madrid players in Ruggeri, who was in my team only a couple of rounds ago, alongside Alvarez. Whilst keeping Mbappé, I would have a second Bayern Munich player instead of two from Real Madrid. So Vinicius becomes the cash cow by selling him to Michael Olise, who has 8 assists this season, and Vinicius is the closest to him when it comes to the assist charts with 7. But those 3 transfers is all I would need, and it leaves me with 0.5 million in the bank. And in terms of other players I'm looking to buy, I think Vitinha and Doué would be the other ones, and that would be for Francisco Trincao, but it's not worth taking a -4 hit, and ultimately it's not feasible if I also want to buy Alvarez. So it's probably one or the other. I get that second PSG midfielder instead of Trincao, or I get Alvarez for Diaz. That is pretty much what it comes down to, and I would have 8.8 million in the bank, so it would either be the French star who scored the opening goal against Liverpool last time out, or Vitinha coming in, and with Doué, it leaves me with 0.7 million in the bank. Of course, Vitinha is even cheaper, and that's with Ruggeri coming in for Joao Cancelo. I could afford Joao Cancelo in my setup and keeping him in the process, and I still have one free transfer at my disposal. You can't roll at this stage of the competition. It's all covered, of course, in my How to Play UCL Fantasy Guide. You can only roll in the league phase, of course, but that's a very interesting one. Diaz and Doué / Vitinha, or Alvarez with Francisco Trincao. That is what my sort of final transfer plans could end up being in tomorrow's deadline stream, and with more updates with the press conferences, training sessions, injury updates, you name it, that's all going to form part of my final setup. And I'll be covering both lineups for the Tuesday matches, Atleti versus Barcelona, and of course we've got PSG away to Liverpool. So I'll cover those lineups and then lock in my final transfers, but that's definitely going to be very important. If I see Doué on the bench, for example, then I would either go for Vitinha or leave Trincao in this 50-man squad and focus on Alvarez to replace Luis Diaz. Thank you very much for watching this video and listen to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date on my content, both FPL and UCL Fantasy. Let's get this video in particular to over 200 likes and closing on new goals like 39,000 subscribers on YouTube. Follow me on X, Instagram, Blue Sky, Dylan RCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, for likes to my videos, proud to comments, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the UCL Fantasy League, and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you tomorrow for the next UCL Fantasy deadline stream. Stay tuned for FPL content throughout the week ahead of Double Game Week 33 with another deadline stream on Saturday.